Thank you so much, Chris. Good afternoon. It's great to be here. And before we get started, let me see a show of hands. How many people have really enjoyed the speakers on the program so far today? I'm telling you, it's not that often. Jim, has it been, almost 15 years since you were here in Virginia doing a circuit like this? 10 plus years. It's just great. I really looked forward to this conference series, to hear him for the first time. Really enjoyed his message this morning. And I tell you, with the speakers and the programs, I know we got a little bit behind. I'm going to try to catch us up on this segment, but it sure was nice to hear Terry's whole story there. It's the first time I'd heard a lot of details about his operation. And one of the highlights for me this week is the producer speakers that have been on the program. I really, really enjoy that and think they add so much. Did you turn this off?
I turned it off. I think you're getting just a little bit of feedback.
All right, we'll try to make this work. But anyway, all the advantages that Jim talked about this morning and Terry showed that he's gained from his increased level of grazing management, to get to that point, I think we all agree that we've got to take great control over the livestock and the grazing of those livestock on our farms. And in order to do that, we often have to, install a good bit of fencing and watering infrastructure to take control and to manage at the higher level. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about the considerations for doing that and what you need to think about up front in order to get the system that you need to have in place to reach the level of management and truly attain the goals and what you hope to reap from that type of system. I'm going to go over defining those goals, the importance of a thorough resource inventory. Then we'll get into planning the layout of the fence and watering system and go over a few tips for fine-tuning it near the end. Defining a goal. Nearly every seminar or meeting you go to, somebody talks about the importance of goal setting. It's kind of a cliche these days to talk about it, but can't emphasize the importance. It's so much better to really define a specific goal. And when I say that, I mean a lot of people have the idea, yes, I want to begin rotational grazing or management intensive grazing, but what do you want to get out of it? And if you truly want to know that if you truly can define what you hope to benefit from it up front and make it as specific as possible, then it makes a lot more sense in how from the very beginning you go to plan the right level of system for you to be able to accomplish those goals in the end and not be disappointed at the end. So people have different reasons for improving their level of grazing management. Some people just want to increase utilization. Others want to boost yield. Others want to do it for the benefit of increased soil quality, increase the desirable forage species in the stand, and so forth. It's worth the time up front to invest that time up front, do the thorough planning so that you can actually meet the goals by management once you've got your system in place. Jim's presentation this morning went over why a lot of people turn from the conventional continuous grazing management to a higher level of management intensive grazing. And some of you are getting very close, and there may be a few people in here who are already doing the 365 days of grazing without feeding any hay for most years. There are a few drawbacks, but if you've reached the point where you're ready to transition and take that step to improve grazing management, you've already weighed it out and see what the benefits are, and you want to go for it. Now, to help you figure out what the best management system would be or the best grazing infrastructure would be, it's critically important to conduct a thorough resource inventory on the farm before you get started. And I'll say this from the NRCS standpoint. When we go out and do farm planning, we focus on obviously the natural resources, the soil, water, air, plants, and animals, but we also consider the human factor or the personnel, or the personal impacts it's going to make for these changes. So in looking at the resource inventory, this is often a step that sometimes gets glossed over by the producer when I'm working with them. They're so excited and passionate and want to get started. They're already convinced they want to do better in grazing management. But it's important, and we're going to go through over a few things here. It's important to go through this process before you start laying pipe and putting in waterers and fencing. Starting with the personnel resource. There's always a decision maker and manager of every operation. And then there's the labor, the people getting the job done day to day and week to week. Some farm situations, it's the same person does all of that. In others, it's 2 or more people that does that. The important thing is good communication. Everybody's operating on the same level, same focused goal. If you're planning a system, who's going to do the labor? Who's going to get it built and put in? Is it going to be contracted out? Is the farm labor? Do they have what it takes to get the job done and get that infrastructure in? Also, once the infrastructure is in place, who's going to manage it? Who's going to do the managing the livestock on the system? Is it going to be the same person that you've had there on the farm who is, for the last 30 years, has spent most of their time cutting, storing, and feeding hay? And if so, are they up to speed on that transition, and can they easily transition and learn to manage those livestock in that new system? Because if not, all the money and time spent in developing this infrastructure won't be fully utilized, and we want to avoid that. Moving on to the other natural resources, before you go to the field, I encourage you to get three maps before you go, and have these in copies so you can write on them when you're in there. You can go to your local NRCS office and ask them for an up-to-date aerial photograph of your grazing boundary with the water features outlined on it for you. This is very important. Also, while you're there, ask for a soil map overlay of that too. You can see right there on the right-hand side. I can't get the pointer to work, I don't think, but on the right-hand map there, you see the different soil series as it changes going over the landscape on this example farm that I'm using here in the presentation. They can help you interpret the differences in the soil types. Is it significant differences in the adaptability of species, in the overall productivity? Does it change much, or are they similar soils where it's not going to be a whole lot of variation in productivity and adaptation of the individual species, where it won't make a lot of difference? It's important to note that and understand that up front before you start laying out your fencing system. And the last thing is the topo map. Obviously, when you're out there in the field, you can tell whether it's steep or not, but aspect or the direction that slope faces is going to play a much bigger part down here in Southwest Virginia than it does for the Piedmont and coastal plain areas. So it's good to have that. Take these maps when you're walking across the landscape. You can make notes and so forth. The land resource. First, is it owned or rented land? You can set up a grazing system on both these type of operations. It'll probably look a lot different though, whether or not it's owned or rented. Most of us are not comfortable investing a lot of money in permanent infrastructure on land that we don't have a long-term lease on. And that's understandable. But you can invest some other type of temporary portable infrastructure if some certain things are there, and you can get a basic level grazing system that will benefit you and maybe accomplish your goal. What type of production level is the farm capable of, or the land? Have you taken recent soil fertility samples? This might be a farm that's been managed in your family for years. It may be a farm that you just picked up a lease on. Is it run down? Is all the fertility gone on it? Get those fresh soil samples. Look at the nutrient status of the soil relative to pasture maintenance. After doing that, what's the potential productivity capacity or capability of the soil? Your local conservationists can go over the different soil types and give you a relative idea of the production potential of the soil types if it's managed with good fertility and grazing management. Then, as you're walking through, make note of certain situations. You see the picture there. I hope you can see it. There's certain areas on all farms that maybe shouldn't even be in grass and grazing anymore. Maybe it's too steep or too rocky. Maybe it's susceptible to erosion. Maybe the soils are too wet in certain areas and they're not adapted to the desirable forage species anymore. Make note, mark those areas, and think about the way you're going to lay out the grazing system, the fencing and so forth. Will that help remediate these areas, or do they need to be planted in some other type of land cover? The water resource, critical aspect of developing a grazing system plan. But basically, what are the current water resources, the natural features on the land right now? Obviously, for most farms, that's what's been used to water the livestock. Is it feasible to think you can continue to use those surface waters, maybe at a limited or restricted use restricted access to them? Or do you see the value in going in and putting some type of contained water system where you can direct and put water troughs in certain areas? Whether it be a gravity flow system or a pressurized system run off of well, other options. You see right here this graph in the top right-hand corner of the slide. I took that directly out of the Missouri Grazing Manual. Basically, they did the research there in the 1980s looking at what effect for, let's see, basically it looks at the distance that cattle have to travel from the water source back away in the pasture to the farther extents. And at what point is it so far that you really lose forage utilization or even grazing distribution? And what they determined, it was right there in that between 700 and 900 feet. When you get out past that, the efficient utilization of the forage resource diminishes fairly quickly. So this may have some impact as to whether you're going to continue to use the natural water features that are on the land, or whether you're going to develop a different water source to help accomplish your goal. The forages themselves, as you're walking across the farm looking down, what type of forage species are adapted and are actually growing well there? Is it thin and pale with a lot of weed encroachment as brush and cedars and multiflora rows moving in? Or is it dense and vigorous with good desirable forage species, just lush growing? These are both two mountain pastures, but they couldn't be more different as far as the forage production on them at this time. Now that picture on the right, that pasture probably looked just as bad or worse than the one on the left 25 years ago. But through good grazing management, over time a little bit of fertility, that farmer got it up to that, and it's a wonderful, highly productive forage and pasture system. Also, you need to document and really look at the animal resource. What's been managed on the farm is one thing, but what are your goals in the future for your livestock system? Are you managing cattle? You managing small ruminants, horses? Are you do you have a grazing dairy herd? Are you finishing steers? All those things matter. More importantly, do you need access with lanes and so forth from the far extent of your pasture boundary back to like a milking parlor twice a day if you're grazing dairy? Do you do a lot of AI where you need better access and maybe short lanes near in the barn and the working facilities to accommodate that? Just understand and know that. Also going through this process, you're really quantifying your total stocking rate that's presently being managed there right now, and you'll be able to balance that against your benchmark or your forage production capability to see if you're overstocked, understocked, and so forth. Finally, let's look at the facilities and infrastructure that are currently there on this farm. Are the boundary fences in good enough condition to keep going like they are? Any internal fences that might be there, are they laid out in a manner that's conducive to your overall plan? Or is it better to go on and take some of those out and set it up really like you need it to be an efficient system? The same with any waters. You may be able to still use some of the natural water features on the farm and get good efficient utilization of your forages and your paddocks near those from a restricted access standpoint. But is there a well there on the property? Is there electricity there on the property? Can you tap into that well to develop a pressurized system and capitalize on that? To document what's there and the way you really want to go. And at this point, you've done that thorough inventory. You drop back, and now it's time to analyze it before getting started. What you do, you develop your benchmark. What's your production level right now with the resources you've got? You go back and look to refine your goals and think about, all right, based upon my goal, what level of intensity do I need to plan and build this grazing system to in order to accomplish my goal? In the same time, we're going to wind up here in a few minutes considering animal flow through the system, making sure it's a functional, cost-effective system with some flexibility built into it. Before we pass the rest of this slide, oftentimes people ask, what's the minimum number of paddocks I need? And that really depends on your goal, okay? But if you look over here, one of the main goals that people have in general is they want to be able to, number one, increase the overall utilization of the forage by the grazing livestock in the system. And in doing so and giving the paddock some rest, they hope to boost overall productivity or yield of the forages as well. If you look right here, the source for this table extrapolated it from 3 different sources and kind of combined it. But basically, this looks at the grazing period on paddock. So if you have large paddocks, lower stock density, you'll see there in the left-hand column down near the bottom, you'll be on your herd will be on that individual paddock a longer time. The more paddocks you have, the smaller they are, the higher your stock density for that short grazing period. Then over the course of the season, you're going to increase your seasonal utilization of that forage, okay? They're going to be consuming more of it instead of trampling and wasting so much of it. If you want to design it at a high intensity level, you're going to have a lot of paddocks, short grazing periods, okay, rotating through the system. And vice versa, as you go down, 4 to 7 days, 8 to 14, 15 to 21, you're going to lose efficiency, but you're still going to provide rest. So it really depends on your goal. A starting point for a lot of people is to use that simple equation there in the bottom, looking at, all right, what rest period do I want to provide the forages in my system as an average rest period? Now, obviously, the different seasons, you're going to need a different length of rest period. But on average here in Virginia, if we target maybe a 28-day rest period, okay, you could plug that 28 in there. How about the length of the grazing period? Okay, the shorter the grazing period, perhaps the better we could be at achieving that 365 days a year plan. But also, you got to look at your specific goals. Let's put in there up to 7 days, okay? So 28 divided by 7 is 4, plus 1 is 5. It's a simple equation to start thinking about that as a starting point and building further. And before we go any farther, look at the benchmark. That 69-acre grazing boundary that I showed you up front in that map. All right, the farmer's got 32 cows. He's got an average calving efficiency. He's only got 28 calves for those 32 cows. 69 acres. He's kind of a low end of the production, about 5,800 pounds per acre. Continuous grazed, so seasonally he's only harvesting about 35% of the forage that's growing in that pasture acreage. And he's feeding, it's pretty high right there, 145 days a year. So for him to set a specific goal in this situation, maybe a specific goal would be, let's increase forage utilization up to 50%. So we're going to pick up 15% on utilization, increase yield by 500 pounds per acre, and we're going to, in implementing this system, we want to cut it down to from 145 days down to 105 days of hay feeding a year. Now remember, when you go to installing your fencing and your watering infrastructure, setting up your grazing system, it's a perfect time to consider addressing some of these natural resource concerns that you may have identified in their walkover. Let's face it, over the last 25 years, there's been hundreds, if not thousands, of farmers here in this part of the state, Southwest Virginia, that have implemented conservation practice on the land to benefit the soil and the water resources on the grazing lands, and that's often been tied with improvements to a grazing system. So this is the baseline forage animal balance, feeding about 145 days a year in this particular system. When you walked over the land, you identified and you marked down these notes. These pictures here, different points along that stream corridor. There's a lot of erosion and direct runoff and sediment into the streams along several areas there. At the same time, along the stream corridor, the left picture shows there's some marshy and wet areas that aren't very productive as far as forage desirable species. These underproductive areas are forcing more stress and grazing pressure on the upland areas, okay, which results in more overgrazing on the pasture, on the true pasture. At the far southern end of this property, it's where the concentrated hay feeding goes on. After 145 days a year, this is basically what it looks like. Okay? High nutrient accumulation. It's a denuded area susceptible to more erosion and runoff. weed infestations. You see the remnants of the spiny amaranth that was growing there earlier in the year. It'll be back. And but that's what we have there on this particular farm. But he was committed to transitioning to a basic level rotational grazing. He didn't want to spend a whole lot of money, okay? He wanted to use the natural resource or the natural water sources that were on the farm, but he was willing to exclude the majority of the stream and fence that out, having controlled access points for water, okay? It's not the perfect layout for a perfect system, but he's gone from one continuous grazing boundary, putting in 2 water crossings and access points on that stream. He's got a 5 paddock system, and it's got it's pretty good accessibility there. Can he meet his goal? I think he can, just by putting in the stream exclusion fences and the 3 subdivision fences. He's got those 5 paddocks. He's getting some good rest in between his grazing periods in each one of those paddocks. I think he can boost his utilization efficiency up to 50% in a system like this. And just with those rest periods, I would estimate he is going to pick up 10% yield after a whole season worth of growth and grazing management. Now, this just illustrates, his production curve with the animal demand and the change, and I think he can get down with that basic level system to that 105 days of feeding if he manages it well. Functionality. Does this system allow cattle flow through the system? You can see the arrows got drawn there. The pointer's not, there's the pointer. But basically, where he's strategically placed these access points and crossings with gates, he can flow through. Now, if we were back here and we needed to get them back to the barn, there's not a lane system, okay? But you can work them back through these gates and get them back here as needed and so forth. Again, it's not a perfect system. It's low cost and functional. Did we meet our goals on getting good utilization by having good access to water? You see those long distances? We're still stuck at, 1,250 feet here, 1,350 feet there. For an ideal system of beef cows like this, what would we like to see the maximum distance from the water sources be? About that 800-900 range at the most, right? If it were a grazing dairy situation, we'd rather see it down closer to 500 feet at the max. All right, like I said, he could have done better than that. Would it be cost effective for this person to take it to the next level and tap off? There's actually a well down here by the old homestead, and he has electricity there. So if he plugged in a well right there, he could potentially run some pipeline, put in a permanent trough, another pipeline, and go either permanent or temporary trough right there. For seasonal grazing 9 months a year back there, he could accomplish that with a temporary trough right there. The placement of those waterers on those fence lines will allow for additional cross fencing, whether it's permanent like this to establish a sacrifice area, or whether it's temporary with polywire or polytape, just to be able to make the size of those paddocks what you want based on the forage availability at that time. Now, he's gone from the 5 paddock system to a 10 paddock system relatively quick, just by using some polytapes or polywire, some more cross fencing, and it's easy to do with this pressurized system. In doing so, we've reduced those long distances right there. We're maximizing a little bit better forage utilization in this type of system. Now, this was just one scenario. When you're going through this process, before you break ground or start driving fence posts, you need to look over different scenarios, different layouts, get other people to look at it, okay? What you want to do is you want to build it up front so that you have a lot of flexibility as you go forward in time. You don't want to just think, all right, in a year from now, I want this. Okay, that's step one. But you want to build it so that 3 years from now, 5 years from now, and so on, it has the capacity that it can be expanded if you need to. That goes for looking at the water options, the fencing options, to help you with your overall flexible management. A lot of people who I've worked with who've gotten in at that base level, that 5 to 8 paddock system, once they make that transition and get used to that, boy, they really like it. They see the benefits they're achieving and they want more. There's different ways to do it. One way to do it is with some flexible products. You got a lot of flexibility now with temporary or portable water products. You see these, a lot of people are using some of these portable stock tanks with the float valves, hooking that hose to quick connects that are buried underground with a cap there. There are all kinds of tricks to use like this. Some farmers I've seen, especially on some rented land, sometimes they'll run a pipeline on the surface down the edge of that pasture, under that fence line, and they have quick connects on that. It's only seasonal. They can use it about 9 months a year. They drain the pipeline, but it gives good flexibility on a rented system if they've already got a well there. To couple with that is the flexible fencing or portable fencing products. Even on farms where you don't have an electricity source, now there's some pretty good solar chargers. There's some battery-powered chargers. It's things like this to take advantage of. Coupled with that, whether you're running a single high-tensile steel wire around the perimeter or down the middle of the property, you can come back with step-in posts, polywire, polybraid, polytape, things like that, and divide off other areas off of that. You may only be able to get 2 large cross sections or 4 paddocks out of a piece of rented ground using portable products like this, but that 4 paddocks may do you a lot better than just the continuous grazing model. Okay, so keep these products in mind, especially when you're looking to expand and ratchet up the management to take you to the next level. All right, easy and effective in many cases using these portable products. Basically, even if this farmer that I was using in the beginning with this other scenario, even if they did not have the potential to tap into a well there on the farm, there are different arrangements where just using those designated water access points, you can take poly wire and so forth, as long as the fences are electric, and divide these other paddocks. It's cost effective, it's fairly easy, and you get more utilization and you reap more of the advantages and benefits that these people have talked about today without having to spend and put in that hard infrastructure. Another advantage of that is you get to look at where you may want to put a permanent fence. You do it with the temporary fence to see if it works right, to see if the flow is right. You do that for a season, and then you can decide and have more surety about it that yes, this is where I want that fence to go. So all in all, this allows for and maximizes flexibility within your management. Regarding what type of livestock you're raising, okay? There are different types of portable fencing products and so forth for small ruminants versus cattle versus horses, etc. I've gone over a lot of information. At this point, I just want to encourage you, for those who are looking to either transition from a continuous system or those who are in a base level system looking to ratchet up the management and really capitalize on the benefits, take action this year. Assemble your grazing team. You don't have to do this by yourself. Take advantage of the resources in your local area. Talk to the other grazers who have gone through this process before, who have really achieved a lot of these benefits, and get their opinions on the layout that you've sketched out in draft form. Visit your NRCS office, your Soil and Water District office. Capitalize on the expertise that these folks have in designing watering system to meet your grazing system needs. Get their opinion on grazing system layouts and so forth. They can really help you, provide a lot of technical assistance if you ask for it. Make sure you've looked at different scenarios and layouts, refine your goals, get that plan developed, and then begin the transition. Okay? What else can NRCS offer you? As you all know, there's different options for financial assistance. This year, right now, with the extension of the Farm Bill, these programs here, EQIP has been funded, and there's a good bit of money there, statewide that is, The next the sign-up period, the next sign-up period ends February 15th, and those applications will be ranked by March 1st. And the third sign-up period will end March 15th, and those will be ranked and due April 1st. At least that's the time frame right now. So if you're interested in doing some improvements to your grazing system, and you know you're going to incorporate some conservation into that process, stop by your local office and talk to them about your plan, and also see what they can offer as far as you signing up maybe for some financial assistance. That wraps up what I had to say. At this point, are there any questions before we move on to the final speaker? Okay, if not, I'll be around afterwards. And is Jim here?